Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for another WeSys webinar. We're super thrilled to be having the IBM team here to be talking about improving the safety, security, and trustworthiness of business AI. So what a timely, worthy conversation for all of you to take time of your morning, afternoon, or evening to be here today with the WeSys community to learn the shared knowledge that the IBM folks have to bring us here today. So my name is Lynn Dome. I'm a Woman in Cybersecurity Executive Director. We often go by our acronym WeSys, and we spell that W-I-C-Y-S, pronouncing it WeSys like we sisters, because that's exactly what we are. We are a global cyber sisterhood. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we have over 9,000 members with representation in 95 countries. We also have 67 professional affiliates all around the world, and professional affiliates are extensions of the WeSys global organization. And on top of all of that, we have over 250, we have 252 to be exact, student chapters. And so our mission is to recruit, retain, and advance women in cybersecurity. And what we do is we provide accessibility and opportunities to cybersecurity. We layer it with mentoring and resources and all the wraparound services for everyone within our organization to achieve the success that they're seeking. And then we align it with our close to 70 strategic partners that fund us as a nonprofit organization with year-round support. And with that, we bring this culture of inclusion. We bring this place where everyone belongs in cybersecurity. And that's the WeSys community. So we have many different initiatives that help support us in that effort. We have skill development training programs, scholarships, grants, and awards, not only for our conference that actually is coming up April 10th through the 13th in 2024, but for other conferences as well. We have an inclusion and allyship resources. We have speaking and media opportunities because we know it's hard to be what you cannot see. And so therefore, these initiatives are very important. We have a job board where all our strategic partners like IBM recruit from year round. And all our members, our 9,200 and something members, have access to upload their resumes and apply for the jobs within the job board. We have apprenticeships and internships, leadership series, leadership summits, a speakers bureau, speaker spotlight program, a mentor-mentee program, and so many other initiatives. And we owe all of that thanks with a special thanks to our strategic partners and IBM that brings us to the webinar today. And so we have an incredible team that is here to be discussing improving the safety, security, and trustworthiness of business AI. It's a panel discussion, and it's important for you all to know that at the bottom of your screen, we have the ability for you to put your questions in the chat. And Heather Ricciuto, who is leading and moderating today's panel, will be answering those questions live. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic on over to Heather, but I would also like to encourage everyone that's joining and wants to learn more about the WeSys organization to please subscribe to our WeSys newsletter. So with that, I'm going to end the slides right here, and I am going to pass the mic on over to Heather. Heather, take it away.
Lynn, thank you so much. We all are so happy to be here today. As Lynn said, I'm Heather Ricciuto. I am what we call a lifer at IBM. In other words, I've spent my entire career at IBM, and I am an IBMer with a passion for cybersecurity and for lifelong learning, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I am really pleased to be here today to moderate today's panel. Little bit more about me. I will also tell you that I am a longtime WeSys member and former WeSys Ontario, Canada affiliate vice president. So clearly, I also have a passion for WeSys, the organization. Today, I am joined by Debbie Taylor-Moore, Phaedra Buonadiris, and Srini Tumalapenta, all three of whom are experts in their own rights on both cybersecurity and AI. And so I'm very excited to moderate this discussion today. Before I get into our line of questions for this afternoon, I'd like to actually ask our panelists to briefly introduce themselves. So Debbie, I'll start with you, and then we'll move on to Phaedra and to Srini, if that's okay.
Sure. Thank you, Heather. I appreciate it. And it's great to be here. I am also a WESIS member. I've been a WESIS member since 2014, since like almost the very beginning. And I believe in WESIS. I'm a senior partner and also a VP of cybersecurity for IBM Consulting. So I help clients do their very best with all types of emerging tech. I've worked in the emerging tech space in cybersecurity for 22 years. So I've been a practitioner, I've been an executive, been an investor. I've run 2 accelerators, and I've come back to IBM for AI and more AI. And so I also work in quantum safe, but I'm happy to be here and I'm looking forward to this session. I'll pass it over.
Phaedra, yes.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you.
Hello and thank you. My name is Phaedra Bueno-Diris. I am the author of this book, AI for the Rest of Us. I'm also IBM Consulting's global leader for Trustworthy AI. I lead our own Trustworthy AI Center of Excellence, and I serve on our own AI ethics board. So pleased to be here. I truly care about this subject, so thank you again for the invitation.
And Srini, last but not least.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon, team. My name is Srinivas Malapenta. I'm a 23-year-old IBMer. Started as a developer, rose through the architect profession, and now I'm the distinguished engineer and CTO for cybersecurity services. Been with security for about 17 years, have worked on various topics such as cloud security, zero trust, now focusing on AI. Very passionate about the topic, and I also support various efforts within IBM, do roundtables and conversations with and mentoring of our team members. So excited to be here.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, now let's get to it. Phaedra, could you do me a favor to help set the stage? Can you explain to our audience briefly what we mean when we use this term trustworthy AI?
Yes, ultimately, what the intent when we say the words trustworthy AI is that it is AI that, in essence, earns people's trust. And it is because we expect our own human values to be reflected in technology systems like AI. And what I mean by that is we expect it to not lie, to not discriminate. We expect that it will protect our privacy. We expect that it will be safe for us and our children to use. And that ultimately it could be used to augment our own human intelligence and not be used to have control over us or to displace us in ways. So that's what the purpose of the words trustworthy AI means.
Thank you. And, you know, I love that you used the word augment in your explanation. I often say that I prefer the term augmented intelligence over artificial intelligence because there's nothing really artificial about it because it's humans that have taught the artificial intelligence, right? So let me ask you, how can we ensure that AI systems, particularly generative AI systems, adhere to ethical standards in decision-making processes?
Is that also for me?
Sure, yes,
okay.
please.
All right, well, there is nothing easy about doing that. Absolutely nothing easy. There's no easy button. And the reason why there's nothing easy about it is because it's ultimately not a technical challenge. It's not a technical challenge with a technical solution. It's something that is socio-technical. And the reason why it's socio-technical is, again, because we're trying to reflect our own human values into technology. And AI is built using data, and data is an artifact of the human experience. We humans, we make the data, or the machines that make the data, but we have over 188 biases and counting. So what AI is incredibly great at is it acts as a mirror that reflects our own biases back at us. but we have to be brave enough and introspective enough to look into the mirror and decide, is what's being reflected back, does it align to my values? If it does align, be transparent. Like, here's why we picked the data that we did. Here's why we picked the methodology that we did. If it does not align, that's when you know that you need to change. And what's fascinating about generative AI, especially generative AI that produces images, is that it really offers a tell to this, exactly this idea of the mirror. There's a fantastic video that the London Interdisciplinary School put out, and I'll put a link so everybody can go check this out. It's really short. But in essence, they did a statistical analysis with AI-powered image generators, right, using generative transformers. And because there's no retest reliability with generative transformers, every time you give it a prompt, of course, it gives you a different output. So what the school did was they would ask the question, show me a picture of a typical prisoner. Show me a picture of a typical CEO. What about a doctor? And then they ran a statistical analysis to see, let me check which gender, race, ethnicity, skin color is being represented with these outputs. And they found, unsurprisingly, that there are serious representational harms, right? Here in the United States, for example, 38% of our doctors, or 39% of our doctors are women, and yet a woman was only shown by the image generator when prompted, show me a picture of a doctor, only 7% of the time. And then they, and again, you can imagine, show me a prisoner, show me a terrorist, show me a CEO, same sort of representational harms. And then they went further and they said, create an image of a Barbie doll that represents each country around the world. And what they found, right, was all the Barbies from South American countries have light skin, blonde hair. The one representing Germany is wearing an outfit that is reminiscent of an SS Nazi uniform. Several of the Barbies from Africa are literally holding machine guns. And again, it prompts the question, where did this training data come from? And remember, today, there's this teeny tiny, small, homogeneous group of people that are deciding which data sets to use to train our models. So in order to have AI better reflect the widely diverse communities that we must serve, we desperately need to have far more diverse and inclusive groups of human beings developing AI with us.
So I think you really just touched on the next question that I wanted to ask you, which is, what can we do to mitigate challenges like this? And so you've really given us some food for thought. One of the ways is to ensure that there are more diverse groups that are contributing, right?
And so diverse, not only in terms of gender, race, ethnicity, but also truly different lived world experiences is key. And then on top of having this diverse group of people developing AI, we desperately need people to be multidisciplinary, right? Who've got understanding of things like legal frameworks, psychology, sociology, history. And I'll say history because today there are people who are developing AI models to do things like predict what percentage interest rates people should get on home loans who've never heard of the word redlining before. So we desperately need people who understand inequity and disparate impact developing AI models today. Additionally, we need people who are making determinations as to which data sets to use to train our models to be working with true domain experts. Because more often than not, what we find is when data scientists take the time to ask a domain expert, is this the right data to use to train this model? The domain expert says no. So this space has to be approached with humility. You've got to have an open growth mindset, diverse, inclusive, and multidisciplinary. Again, really thinking about governance and safeguard rails and making sure that the AI systems that we're developing are reflecting our values.
Thanks, Phaedra. So Debbie, let me ask you a question, see if you can answer this one. How can, we've kind of talked about AI in broad terms, and challenges associated with it, and how we can mitigate some of those challenges. But now if we think more specifically about products that are being developed, how can developers ensure that AI systems are reliable and trustworthy? Is there anything else that can be done in addition to the suggestions Phaedra has made?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So first, let's take a step back to what organizations are kind of most concerned about. And really and truly, everybody's running forward with AI and finding themselves experiencing amazing steps forward and advancement. But at the same time, there is the concern about business risk as it relates to the misuse of AI, whether that's trust and reputation potentially, or impacts to performance. There's concern about legal risk, concern about privacy and confidentiality, and then, of course, IT operations risk. And so this area is advancing so rapidly that what I find is that most organizations that we speak with are really looking first at having some visibility within the organization of where AI is even being used. And then after that, certainly looking to see what applications and what their priority is around the applications in terms of different sets of classification than what we've used traditionally. So I think with regard to visibility on the AI and visibility on the people that use the AI and visibility on the models themselves, the intent, and the developers that are building these systems, ensuring that people have an education that really looks at transparency and looks at the intent of the model, the intent and the purpose. Because for the most part, from a cybersecurity perspective, we're very used to protecting data and, vis-a-vis traditional tools and, data security. But this touches so many stakeholders. And if folks really want to sort of get their arms around it, there has to be a level of governance. But in order to have governance, you have to have visibility. And in order to get your developers in the loop, they have to be trained appropriately. And there has to be, some level of transparency on what's happening with the legacy work that's already been done.
Is there anything we can do with respect to developers to help ensure that biases are being mitigated as well in their efforts?
Well, it's interesting what Phaedra had mentioned earlier about, just representation. It's probably pretty important. But when you speak with most security experts, they sort of see bias as being out of scope, where we think primarily about, the technical processes and the, sort of mitigating risk around, are we using the right security controls? And this idea of bias is one that is really sort of a cultural one within the organization. It really is about the people and the culture and making that important, and that sort of trickling down throughout the organization. I think that some of what makes us vulnerable is the overconfidence that we have. There was an interesting study that came out of a group called SensorWide, who did a study for ExtraHop. And they noted that when they interviewed like 1,200 IT security professionals, and what came back was that 82% thought they could get their arms around this, but less than 50% had done any level of training and really hadn't had all the stakeholders at the table to sort of decide how to go forward. So I think that I don't know that necessarily bias fits neatly into the cybersecurity realm, but it should. It should. There should be a human in the loop to some extent that looks at all of these things, and that there should be ongoing monitoring of the entire AI lifecycle inside of companies.
I think that you're on a great point. I think that too often the human factor is forgotten in cybersecurity, right?
Yeah.
And I suppose the same is true in AI. So here's my next line of questioning. I want to, we've essentially without using the term, we've kind of been talking about the good guys and what the good guys are doing with AI. But of course, we know it's not only the good guys using AI. So can one of you comment on how adversaries are exploiting AI in their development efforts, in producing their own attack vectors, et cetera?
Yeah, I can comment on that.
Awesome.
So adversaries also have AI. It's their own version of AI, their own version of ChatGPT. It's called Worm GPT. For $75 a month, you can actually get a GPT-like environment for them to do all the prompts that they want. They want to create malware. They want to create cloning. They want to create penetration testing code, etc. So they can create all of the bad things that can be leveraged. So that's the ecosystem that they are building. With that ecosystem, what has happened is the barrier to entry to becoming a hacker or the bad actor, adversary, has now lowered. So more and more people can come in, and more people can create complicated and sophisticated attacks and launch these attacks in a massive scale. Okay? So that's the adversary, so how the ecosystem is evolving. I'll give one example, voice cloning. There are reported events that have happened where a mom was sent a voice clone of a cloned voice of a daughter. It was a kidnapping scam. That's happened. Very believable, right? So it was reported to police, and nothing bad happened in that, but they were able to catch up. Right? Another example is a executive assistant was sent a voice, the cloned voice from a manager, asking that assistant to transfer money into this particular bank account, and that actually successfully happened. Okay? So that's the way the adversaries, they have an ecosystem for themselves. They're also starting to use the ecosystem and go use that for adversarial purposes and attack the systems.
So, as AI systems become more sophisticated, obviously new security vulnerabilities may arise, and I think you've just shared a couple of clear examples. So, how can organizations ensure that their AI systems are secure?
Yeah. So the AI systems, we'll have to look at in terms of the consumption model of the AI system. Okay? AI could be consumed as a service. So if you go to ChatGPT, you're consuming it as a service where you're entering prompts from a application user interface and going, putting those prompts and getting the responses from the AI system. So that's one. Second one is you're developing the models, or you're tuning the models, be it on a cloud-based systems or be it in your own environment. So that's the second consumption model. Okay? So the risk in the first model, which is using AI as a service, is that there could be sensitive data leakage that will be happening through the prompts. And you are providing either sensitive information about the enterprise or personal identifiable information or some other information that's not supposed to be revealed, intellectual capital, property, or digital rights information that are not supposed to go outside of the enterprise boundary. That's a huge risk. Okay? Now, how do you mitigate? And one of the questions I see in the questions here is, do we have sensitive information or data protection tools? There are tools available in the market today. There is a company called Baffle.io, Protect AI, Hidden Layers. These are the companies that are developing tools to inspect the prompts inline, detect any sensitive information leakage, detect also the context of the prompt itself, and prevent that from leaking into the AI as a service system. Right? The second part is when you're actually using the models, training the models, hosting the models on your infrastructure or on your cloud infrastructure. I'll give 3 examples because it'll take, it's about 8 things that you have to factor, but we'll only limit to 3 examples where you're looking at the infrastructure layer, right? It could be cloud infrastructure. These are attacks that are happening today. They're no different than for AI systems as well. So for example, cloud misconfigurations happen. There is a very recent data leakage that has happened from a very large company. The researchers caught that particular data leakage, so nothing bad happened for that particular company, but that was mainly a cloud exposure, a misconfiguration that has happened on the cloud. It's a traditional attack type. Right? So number one, so what do we do? How do we mitigate that thing? Raise your hygiene. Look at cloud security posture management tools. Ensure that there are no misconfigurations happening. If something happens, detect and immediately block that particular thing. Now, second thing is about data. Fedra mentioned about it. We mentioned about it. All the important point of the data is what is that training data set, the content within the training data set is. That teeny tiny percent of the people who are actually collecting the data and using it for training purposes, they may leave personal information, sensitive information, intellectual properties, code bases, for example, right? We've had situations where now there are lawsuits that are happening in terms of, hey, you still stole my code, or you using my properties, right? So all that information, there is also information like hate, abuse, profanity, all that information is available. So as part of the building the training data set, in addition to all the things that Debbie and Fedra has mentioned, you also have to inspect for any of this sensitive information. Ensure nothing like that is available. That becomes the training data set, and you then take it to the model. Okay. The third example is the model itself. The models will have vulnerable code. They're not perfect. So while you're bringing the model into your environment, you have to ensure you scan for the vulnerabilities on the model, ensure that that particular glue code, it's called pickle files, that particular glue code is not vulnerable for for adversaries to take advantage of it and hack into your models, right? And thereby hack into the data, etc. So vulnerability scanning and putting defenses from a traditional standpoint, all those things have to be enabled. In the new attack types, there will be new attack types that will also be coming in, which is like a prompt injection attack. 6 months back, I did not hear about what a prompt injection is, right? Now it's a prompt injection attack. It'll be exploiting your prompts, etc. So new attacks will be coming in, new tools will be coming in to block those attacks. So you got to take those new tools, apply to that existing tool set, existing monitors, enhance the playbooks, train your staff about the new attack types and the new attack vectors, have the playbooks and the responses ready. So there are more, but we'll for this conversation we'll limit to that 4 things.
So thanks, Srini. I think what you've done really is touched on the need for continuous monitoring and improvement or adaptation of the models to ensure that they are aligned with ethical standards and security requirements. Are there any other best practices for updating AI models to ensure that or to address emerging ethical concerns and security threats? Because it's not, they too evolve, right?
Yep. And that's where it's important. And both Debbie and Fedra mentioned about this. The data evolves over a period of time. The training data set keeps on evolving over a period. The models tend to evolve over a period of time. The model efficiency goes down, some tuning has to happen, and then the models tend to evolve over a period of time. The best way to monitor, manage these things is you got to monitor the data lineage, you got to manage the model lineage, and the combined thing that becomes a container or an application. And we have to ensure on an ongoing basis we are monitoring for the accuracy levels, you're monitoring for the performance, all those things, and ensure that when the model is not performing well or misbehaving, we bring it down and then bring in the alternative models to bring the performance levels, etc.
I would add on to what Srinivas just said is you need to start with who is accountable. Like who in the organization is actually accountable for outcomes from the models? And then do they have a funded mandate to do all the work that they need to do? Like, do they have the resources? Do they have the money? Do they have the power? I mean, so And I'm underscoring this because so often what we're finding is that organizations will hire someone like a chief risk and compliance officer and then not give them the budget that they need in order to do the kind of AI governance and crafting of safeguard rails or the auditing of models as Srinivas described, et cetera, that needs to be done.
Yeah.
So in addition to the use of really important tools to glean insights about our models and how they're performing over time, there's also this concept of what needs to happen within our organizations in order to actually do the work.
That is such a good point. It's so true. I think that, overwhelmingly, a lot of the threat associated with any of these deployments has less to do with external threats and really more internal, unintentional things that happen. And you'll find that a lot of the IT folks and security people that have been sort of pulled into this will say that it's almost become, particularly generative AI, has almost become like another shadow IT. They'll say even though there's been a complete ban in our organization, that bans don't work, and that a lot of what's happening is happening right on the BYOD mobile phone of a vast number of employees. And so this idea overall, though, about the promise that productivity brings and how folks are using that to their advantage is something that organizations have to weigh, because you do, like, as Phaedra has mentioned, you need the sponsorship at a very high level in order to get all the people aligned and get actual dedicated resources to do what Srini has outlined. And so the dedicated resource piece is really hard because no one particularly owns it, but the outcomes are critically important to organizations. So I would have to agree with that assessment.
Are there industries or organizations where the deployment of generative AI in particular should be approached with extra caution?
Highly regulated ones will tell you that those are the ones that, at least in my travels, I see the most bans are around those. And again, you cannot put the toothpaste back in the tube. Folks are seeing the benefit. And so what I see also with security folks is that we are reticent to run toward the fire, so to speak, because we don't want to be seen as a roadblock to innovation. And in most organizations, there's a lot of development going on all across the business units. And so those folks have a lot of control over their domain from a developer, data scientist standpoint of where the AI may sit. And IT and IT security may completely not really have as much authority or visibility into what's actually going on there. So you need the people at the top to care.
And just, sorry, go ahead, Srini.
I'll say in every industry segment, using generative AI, be cautious about it. Okay? And where I'm concerned is the output of a prompt could be inaccurate. And if you're taking that particular output and putting it as an input to another one, and then subsequently, you're going into different automation, automating the tasks, you may get to a very inaccurate answer, right? And it's a cascading effort. There is an example of you can make a holiday trip through automation, through AI, through generative AI. So you may be asking for something and you may be landing up in a different spot for your holiday. So you got to be cautious about using generative AI in every aspect.
I think you touch on a really great point that no matter what the output is as a result of the prompt you've input, there's still got to be some human judgment applied as to how the output is used and whether, well, how much of it to trust and to believe, right?
I would caution, though, even then, like, let's say you've got a call center environment and you're using generative AI in order to make your team of call center operators more productive. Even then, even if you tell them, this system may hallucinate, be very cautious about the outputs. The next question I would have is, what behaviors are you measuring in that personnel? Because you get what you measure. If you're measuring how productive they are, how quickly they go through all of the things, right? Then they're actually disincentivized to look cautiously at the outputs and tweak it and offer feedback, etc. They're far more incentivized to say, yep, click, yep, click. Do you see what I'm saying? So in addition to making sure that people truly have AI literacy on the differences between generative AI and other forms of AI, what is the nature of a hallucination? What is the nature of a biased output? Then there has to be system framing. What is the ecosystem around this personnel, and what behaviors are we incentivizing in them? Because else, again, we're going to get what we measure.
So for any listeners out there who have not heard this term hallucination before in relation or in the context of AI, could you quickly explain that in layman's terms?
I actually hate this word. I despise it. And the reason why I hate it is
But
because
it's really caught on, right? It's really
it anthropomorphizes AI, right? But in essence, generative AI is vastly different than other forms of AI, of its predecessors, right? Generative AI is called generative AI because it synthetically generates content. Large language models is a form of generative AI that generates text, right? What it's really, really great at is it predicts the next syntactically correct word in a sentence. That's what it's really great at. It fundamentally doesn't understand the context of those words or the meaning of those words, right? And oftentimes we have no idea where the heck the training data even came from for these large language models, right? So what the word hallucination means is then again, because it doesn't understand the context or the meaning of those words, it will create an output that is totally erroneous. And there are a few things that are especially dangerous about this. Like in addition to use cases where like you might be asking such an AI, a generative transformer, for medical advice, that is incredibly dangerous if it has outputs that are erroneous. But also, you may find in some of these large language models, the outputs will have little annotations. I don't know if you've played around with enough of these to see these little numbers in the output with proof, like here's authenticated evidence, right? When in fact, none of it could be true. And
Right.
why that's dangerous is because of the level of confidence it portrays in that output. So we, as AI practitioners who really, we want to underscore how important it is to earn trust of these models, we've got to insist on things like, what is the data lineage and provenance of these outputs? Are these outputs accurate? Are these outputs auditable? Are these outputs explainable? And that's what we as practitioners, and then we as users, right? We've got to be far better at asking questions like, who is accountable for this model? When was the last time this was audited? Are we even being told that the output that we're seeing is synthetically generated by an AI and not by a real person? All of these are incredibly important for us to consider.
That's you make such a good point about the hallucination piece. And, when you think of large language models and what they're actually good at, being natural language processing, but they're also really good at writing code. And I think it gives folks, they're so amazed. I've had many people say, well, I was able to put together something that would have taken me, 4 hours in 4 minutes instead. And so if you're using it for writing code, you definitely want to check every line of output. But I think that our larger fear is that folks become so trusting that there becomes a level of over-reliance, and so that things aren't being checked or double-checked, and that we're giving the LLM excessive agency, not in the technical sense of excessive agency, but just generally too much control.
Thanks. Debbie, for your points, and Phaedra, and all three of you, frankly. I would like to move now, because we've been talking about responsibility a lot. It leads me to the desire to move to talking about defenders. You know, we all work in IBM Consulting Cybersecurity Services, and so I would consider all of us defenders. And so, what are defenders doing with respect to AI? How can they leverage AI in cybersecurity? And what sort of benefits is AI providing to defenders of security?
So I'll go first. In the defenders of cybersecurity, you can use this across the NIST cybersecurity framework. For the team that is familiar with the NIST cybersecurity framework, it's about identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Right? That's the phases on how you can tackle a cybersecurity problem. So I'll take 3 examples here. In the identify section, where you're looking for asset information, contextualizing that particular asset information, mapping it to vulnerabilities, mapping it to weaponized exploits, and providing risk scoring around all that stuff. AI and generative AI can be applied to do that analysis, develop the business context and the asset context faster. So you're helping your the team member, the SOC operations team members, to get to the problem statement for a particular asset very quickly. So that's one example. Second example is in the protect phase, and this is already available in the EDR tools, where the EDR tools are now tracking at the endpoint agent itself, are now tracking the behavior of the attack that is happening, the processes and the next steps, and it can identify which process and predict which next step can happen and what stages it can go into. And is this a ransomware attack that is happening? And the malware step is now it's exploiting certain things and it's touching the file systems and it's now going to encrypt the file system. It can detect that kind of a behavioral analysis and put a block to that. So we are now preventing the attack from happening on that. So it's a proactive way of preventing. Then the attacks happen, and then you get all the telemetry and the information coming through this. The SOC team members they have a lot of alerts. Many a times it's noise. Many a times it's unnecessarily evaluating the alerts. All they do is evaluate the alerts. They find it as low value alert or noise, and they generally close it. It's a waste of time for them, right? It's also not helping from a career progression standpoint. It's a SOC analyst experience problem. So what we have done at IBM is we have learned from the telemetry, we have learned from the analyst behavior itself, and used that for training purposes. And then we used that model to predict if a telemetry comes in this way, an alert type comes in this particular way, the model will predict with 90% or more confidence level, you either escalate it or associate it or close it. So we have taken automation steps based on that particular prediction, and then only automated that particular alert about that particular confidence level. So we have reduced the low value alerts going to the SOC analyst, improved the high value alerts going into the SOC analyst, thereby they can spend more time investigation. And there are other examples in the other phases as well, but that's the 3 examples I would say are the priority ones.
Yeah, those are good. I would say that, as it goes for defenders, that people have to recognize that this is very bespoke to their organization, because it's all about what you're trying to protect. You're not trying to, have important IP and trade secrets leaking out, or have any sort of misuse or reputational damage. And so when you think about it, one of the really important things to sort of get ahead, because we're sort of in this space where there's still time, really you have to look at threat modeling within your own environment. And so there's an ocean of fears that everyone has about what could happen. I really like what MITRE has done with MITRE Atlas, because you can go out there and they're actually tracking real incidents that have occurred, real attacks, and they put it against a framework that is very similar to what we use for just traditional vulnerabilities, but they apply specific parameters that exist with AI. So it's very much sort of broadening the attack surface, if you will, when you introduce AI into your environment, or if it's there already. Now you have a way to sort of look at, so what was an attacker's intent? And what was the vulnerability that they wanted to exploit? And you have the whole case study there. You can find out how the risk was mitigated, what security controls were used in order to achieve that. And I think that that is, open source, available to everyone. It's a really good way to start thinking about the way your organization uses AI and applying it to how you might model or predict where things could go wrong.
So that actually leads me to a question that I did see in the questions from the audience. So in addition to, you mentioned threat modeling, but what about, well, let me just put it this way. Betta from Georgia Institute of Technology asks, do you know of any examples of how AI can be used in penetration testing and offensive security? So are there, do you have any other comments that would address Betta's question?
Do you want to take that, or I'll take that?
Yeah. So one example is attack surface management. Right? You can collect the data and use analysis, AI as an analyzer for you to identify the exposures coming from the outside. And so use that mechanism. The other mechanism, other example that I can share is, I talked about the adversarial use of voice cloning. Use it for proper purposes. So you're actually helping those banking clients, you're helping the institutes that have the speaker-based recognition systems to do that simulation testing, help them with identifying the vulnerabilities, identifying what kind of configurations are required to improve their protection. So those are examples, and there are more, but that's a two example.
Yeah, it's interesting. On that vein, there have been companies that I've worked with who have thought about it, are there ways for us to tag the data in order to be able to either better secure it, better recognize it, better pick it up as it's moving and combining with other data sets, and better protect it. And there's so much that's evolving in this space because people are really trying to understand the level of threat and what the threat really is and what they need to care about. But what it keeps coming back to is desktop productivity. It keeps coming back to, so now my admin is doing proposals and is involved with putting together legal documents and involved with all of these things relative to leveraging generative AI that sort of democratize their old role, but puts us in this new sphere of risk. And so we look at the people, the processes, and the technology. And even though the processes and technology piece of it is still very difficult, the people part, I will maintain, is still the challenge. It is still the challenge. No one can completely get their arms around what's going on every single day in their organization. And so I think the governance piece and what we do really well with things like watsonx, our platforms like watsonx, are around the organization sort of marrying its corporate policies to what its individual risk factors are, and bringing IT together with legal, together with data, to all of these folks together to sort of figure out what's the framework we're going to operate in, and then let's train everybody on that. And everybody needs to know sort of like, these are the rules to the road. Just accepting that we're not going to have complete control. Let's at least have governance we can point to that's not just legal. Let's figure out how to transfer risk, but how do we really create an environment with people who are developers, data scientists, folks who are in IT, who are in security, who are all areas of the company, are operating at the inception of developing an application, thinking about AI, if the app's going to have that capability included, and looking back at their legacy organization and their legacy implementations. There's folks that have been working with AI for, 15 years, and they question whether or not their models have integrity, and they want help with that sort of a thing. And they question whether or not they're already in trouble from a regulatory standpoint or from a fairness standpoint. And so we help with that. And it's phenomenal, the value of some of the data models that particularly these older companies have developed over time. They have such tremendous value. They are the crown jewels. And you will find that sometimes they're not prioritized as high as they should be in the organization because people use different classification metrics. But it's we love to help with that sort of a thing. And it's like an archaeological dig when you go in and start to look at what's really important to the organization.
So you mentioned the regulatory landscape. So how do current and evolving regulations impact the development and deployment of generative AI?
I think that from at least the standpoint of how this is evolving, that folks expect in the future to be incentivized in ways to produce better AI, but they expect that people, the individuals, have to care enough to put the pressure on the regulatory bodies. But overwhelmingly, corporations, everyone wants government to be somewhat involved there, and people's rights need to be protected. I think one of the best documents that folks can look at to sort of understand the perils, but also the promise of AI as it relates to our own rights and within businesses and within that framework is the AI Bill of Human Rights that OSTP and the White House have put together. And it's a bunch of just everybody from all over the globe inputting on disparate impact and all these other areas. But it's really important for organizations to sort of key in on that direction, because you are going to need to look at your legacy as well as your future development. And I think that's pretty helpful. I also think the EU is very far ahead in terms of the EU AI Act, in terms of how they're looking at this and looking at they've put together some really good case studies around it that I think are very educational for folks, because I think it's hard for people to imagine what's not happened already. It's hard to imagine the future.
So as we lean on policymakers and government to put regulations in place, how do we balance that need for security with innovation?
I think it starts with education. I think, I had mentioned today what a small, teeny tiny group of homogeneous people there is working on AI. I think we need to transform how we teach the subject of AI in schools. I earnestly believe that AI should be taught in civics class, for example, especially given the nature of data and how we desperately need, the subject matter to be treated in a multidisciplinary way. I think once we have that kind of base understanding of literacy, then we can have people who wish to be doctors when they grow up, or legislators when they grow up, or it's actually irrespective of industry, right? We need to have people trained to have a really good understanding of what is AI, how is it built, and what kinds of things we should get used to asking about organizations who are using AI models, right? As I had mentioned, who is accountable for this model? We should all be used to asking this question. What data was used? Was that data gathered with consent? Is it indeed representative? Was this model audited? How much better does it perform compared to a human being? How often is it audited? What was it audited for? We have to get used to asking these kinds of questions. And again, it doesn't matter what we want to be when we grow up. We all need to be taught to ask these fundamental questions. And we need to be taught to do this far earlier on in our academic careers, which is why, again, we need to be introducing this subject in high school, if not middle school. Heather, you remember the first time we met,
Yes.
We were using serious games to introduce the subject of cybersecurity to middle school kids, right? To middle school girls in particular.
Yes.
And I've introduced this subject of AI ethics and data ethics to Girl Scouts, just simply asking them the question of give me an example of when you've used AI in a way that delights you. Okay, give me an example of when you used AI where it didn't make you feel so good. And then use games to introduce the subject of algorithmic bias, or co-create AI-powered Harry Potter sorting hats with kids so that they can learn what transparency and explainability is. Like, absolutely, we have to go there.
You know, funny enough, we just got a question that came in from the audience, and we've only got about 4 minutes left, so we don't have time to get into this in depth. But the question is, how should AI be used in schools? And so, if I may, I will actually address that and say that, you know, there's this whole debate out there right now in education as to whether, if we allow students to use AI, are they cheating? You know, are they essentially cheating? And my response to that is no, because AI is not going away. What we need to be doing is encouraging students of all ages to embrace AI and educate themselves about its ethical uses, and help them understand that AI is not here to take all our jobs away, but AI can be used to make all of us more productive when it is used ethically. So with that, I'd like to start to wrap things up and ask our panelists if they have any other parting words of advice for our audience.
Yeah,
Okay.
actually.
I'll mention about, just in terms of the regulations, it's not about regulating the innovation, it's about regulating the builders of those applications. We need to ensure that there is governance around it. The second one is, when models learn at the moment from based on technology, when the models learn this, there's no concept of right to unlearn it. There's a concept of right to forget based on GDPR. At the moment, there's no concept of right to unlearn it. So ensuring that training data set is good, perfect, is very, very important.
Thank you, Srinivas. Debbie, you had something you wanted to add?
I did. I think back to 1997, 26 years ago, when IBM introduced Deep Blue. It was the chess playing computer that beat the world chess champion, Garry Kasparov, and beat him in a 6-game match. And I think, people were amazed by that. But when people fear AI, I think of that because it showed the power of AI and ML and the ability to solve complex problems, but it didn't make chess go away. People still love chess. It didn't create any sort of computerized chess only. It didn't change the way we as humans interacted with computers, but it showed how humans could not only be augmented, but also the power and the possibility of AI. So that's 26 years ago, and we're still rolling. But I think that we just got to keep maintaining the guardrails and just be proactive about that.
I love it, Debbie. Likewise, we're all still watching Jeopardy, aren't we?
Right.
So, Phaedra,
and
over to you.
my quick parting thought is, help us fight for more inclusive and accessible education on the subject of data and AI. We need to have more seats at the table. We need far more people building this with us. We need your help.
Yeah.
Thank you, Phaedra. What a great way to close. So I want to thank our audience for joining us today. I want to thank our panelists, Debbie, Phaedra, and Srinivas. And finally, thank you to WESIS for giving us, IBM, this opportunity to share our thought leadership on the subject of AI, particularly in the context of cybersecurity. I'm Heather Ricciuto, and we will sign off now. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.